We've got some arbitration news to break down this week. Everybody's favorite topic of the Major League Baseball offseason. Freddy Peralta rumors. His name is understandably still in the headlines just about every single week, so we'll have the latest rumblings on his trade candidacy. And finally, Spencer gets to talk about what I'm sure will be his favorite topic from the week, the International Signing Day in Major League Baseball. So he's going to have all the breakdown on the 22 names that the Brewers signed as part of their 2026 international free agent class. All that and more coming up on this week's edition of the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Spencer, I just teased what I think is presumably going to be your favorite part of the show this week. So I'm assuming it was a somewhat eventful day for you, but how was your Thursday?
Yeah, my Thursday was fantastic. I focused far more heavily on the international signings than I did my job. Still got my work done, don't you worry. But yeah, there was a heavy focus on what was happening with a bunch of 16-year-olds living in a different country, which maybe isn't the most efficient use of everyone's time, but we've seen Jackson Churio, we've seen Jesus Mate. The guys who signed today are the ones who could be the next version of those guys. So yes, I put a lot of time and energy into that. Frankly, over the last 3 months, I've been putting my energy into finding these players, and I would like the final tally to be noted. I was able to dig up 21 of 22 signings before they signed today. There's only one that came out of nowhere, technically a second, because I thought it was the same player. They signed a Jose Rodriguez and a Josue Rodriguez, and I thought they were the same person, so I didn't realize that. I didn't put them both on my list, but I'm counting it because I found them. But yeah, otherwise, things have been great. I'm talking strictly baseball. We will not talk Bucks or Packers because those are not the focus of this podcast, and I am not happy about either of those. But baseball's coming up for the Brewers. Baseball's coming up for us for coaching. I'm in baseball mode, and I'm very happy about it.
Well, I can think of no better moment than that comment about baseball being close and being excited for all the on-field action to talk about arbitration. The Brewers reached deals with 6 of 7 arbitration eligible players ahead of the deadline for coming to an agreement before exchanging figures. As a reminder, it's not a deadline for avoiding arbitration, but it is the deadline for coming to some kind of deal before the team and the player each have to send their numbers in, what they're filing for. And if there is no agreement after that, those are going to be the 2 figures that the arbitration panel is deciding between. So we have some of the figures that we're just going to run through really, really quickly here. We're also going to look at the MLB trade rumors projections for these players to kind of get an idea of how the Brewers made out on some of these agreements with a few of these players. So the first one, Jake Bauers, the caveat here is that this was already an agreement that was announced way back in November, but we're going to include it in here just as we're looking at some of this stuff. So he agreed to a $2.7 million deal for 2026 in November. His projection at MLB Trade Rumors, which uses their model to kind of estimate what these guys are probably going to make in arbitration that offseason. Bauer's projection was $2 million. Andrew Vaughn signed for $7.65 million. His projection was 7.8. So getting pretty close there to already kind of cutting into the extra that they ended up paying Bauers. Trevor McGill, another guy who came in above projection, $4.7 million. His projection was 4.2. Angel Serpa, $1.095 million. His projection was 1.2. Garrett Mitchell, $950,000. His projection was $1 million. And then Bryce Terang coming in at $4.15 million, a little bit below the $4.4 million. So all in all, the Brewers, I think, made out pretty decently here with the figures that these guys are going to end up making. And again, when you're talking about arbitration, any deal that you're signing a guy for in arbitration is going to be a bargain for most of them anyway. But as a reminder, we're not talking about the same kind of system as a free agency where there's like a more open negotiation like that, and you actually get a chance to sign for your market value. That's not what's going on here. But those are the numbers. A couple guys who came in a little bit higher, but also a few guys who came a little below that. So all in all, nothing super surprising here. But we have the figures now, and we know that most of these players have their contracts accounted for 2026.
Yeah, definitely nothing really in the way of surprises. I mean, maybe just comparing, I mean, you can't really compare them, but just McGill getting $500,000 more than his projection and Terang being under, maybe the two most surprising to me of the group. But in the end, like, we've talked about before. We talked about it a lot last year. It's all based on precedent. The Brewers were able to bring into these negotiations. Here's what we're probably going to be trying to push for. The players are probably going, okay, and their agents really are the ones making these or having these talks, but they're saying this is what we're going to push for. And for all of these guys, they were able to come to an agreement that fit close enough to what each side was okay with. And in the end, nothing super shocking, which is pretty much always the case with arbitration, especially when people settle. Like, it usually is going to make plenty of sense and be pretty comparable to what the projections were saying.
There's one name that was not on this list, and speaking of things that really weren't a surprise, this one's not a surprise either. William Contreras was the only player that the Brewers had eligible for arbitration who did not come to an agreement. As I'm sure everybody remembers, it was the same situation last year where the two sides did not come to an agreement. And if you just kind of look at the Brewers' recent history, the guys that they do not reach a deal with before this first deadline, they're almost always guys who are one of the best in baseball at their respective positions, whether it's Josh Hader, Corbin Burns, now William Contreras. These are guys who are, because of the caliber of their play, they're going to try to reset the arbitration standard for players at their positions. So that's kind of where you're running into some of these inabilities to reach an agreement by that first deadline. So William Contreras and the Brewers exchanged figures. Contreras filed at $9.9 million, which, again, for a player of his caliber, that's a bargain compared to his actual value to the team. If you look at Fangraphs, which tries to estimate dollar value based on wins above replacement, and then they're also going off of like what, on average, what are teams paying for each win above replacement. You look at Contreras' estimate, I think he was somewhere in like the $25 to $30 million range. And that's just based on his production in what was a little bit of a down season for him. So that's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about precedent, and the $9.9 million that he filed for would set a new record for a second-year arbitration-eligible catcher. The number that the Brewers filed for was $8.55 million, which is the current record for a second-year arbitration-eligible catcher. That was set by Will Smith when he signed that deal with the Dodgers in 2024 in his second year of arbitration. So the Brewers basically going for the precedent and not a penny more, and the player, William Contreras, trying to set a new precedent there. So what's going to happen here is the two sides do still have an opportunity to come to an agreement. That's what happened last year. They did file they exchanged figures, I should say, but they were able to reach an agreement in late January before you had to go to a hearing. As a reminder, that was a 1-year deal with an option for 2026. And basically the way that deal played out is Contreras, again, filed for technically not an official precedent because Buster Posey had the record, but Posey had not even comparable to any other season, basically, of any catcher that early in his career, at least in modern times. So Posey was kind of in a class of himself where I think he made like over $8 million in his first year just because he was coming off of a ridiculously good season, like one of the best catcher seasons of all time. Contreras, though, filed for what would have been second to that salary for a first-year arbitration-eligible catcher, and the Brewers filed for the same amount that would have been in Cal Rowley's salary range in arbitration. So they came to that deal. With that contract, the Brewers did give a little toward Contreras' direction where they set that new record, not record, I should say, but the second behind Posey with his salary. But the trade-off was always going to be that club option that was attached to it. The Brewers are giving a little bit up front, and then what they were getting out of this was, depending on the season that William Contreras had, they basically had the ability to keep him for whichever one was going to be cheaper relative to his value. So if he had a ridiculously good season, they could accept the option for the following year, which would be probably less than what he would have made in arbitration. Or if he had a not amazing season or even just kind of a regular season by his standards, they could turn it down, knowing that the amount that he would make in arbitration would be less than that. Based on the season that he had, dealing with some of the injuries, being a good hitter, but not a great one last year, they turn that option down. And you could see why with the numbers that are filed here. Those both come in short of what that club option would have been worth for 2026. So what's going to happen here is, again, they have the ability to try to do something like this again. To me, at least, kind of looking at the way that this sets up, that feels less likely this time. And it feels less likely to me for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I mean, the Brewers already kind of, they're getting the financial payoff from that last deal that they signed right now. So I'm not entirely sure if they would, this is speaking speculative, just from like an analysis standpoint. I don't know if they would want to do that again. Like, why would they want to give away the quote unquote payoff of that last deal that they signed now that the more favorable part for them is coming around? And again, by favorable, I mean favorable under the standard of arbitration. Like, any salary you get him for that's under $30 million is favorable in the grand scheme of things. But playing according to the arbitration system, I don't understand why they would want to give that away, really, by doing another one of these deals and just kicking the can down the line a second time. Number two, I think we need to have the honest discussion. Like, there's a very good chance that no matter what, this might be his last season with the Brewers anyway. Whether there is a dispute in arbitration, whether there wasn't, I don't know how much it would matter. I think we've touched on it a little bit before. We don't think they should extend him, at least for the kind of extension that would make sense from his standpoint. I don't think he's taking any in-between extension that takes him through like age 31 or age 32. Like, I don't understand why he would do that, because that would be that's not going to help him, his ability to actually get the payday that he deserves. Then from the Brewers' standpoint, for a catcher who has already caught as many games as he has, a guy who they are basically letting him grind his body down during the years that he's here, are you going to want to sign a guy like that for his mid-30s, especially if there is a little bit of a drop-off there? Like, just from the Brewers' standpoint, you're already getting what are probably going to be his best seasons. You know, he's on his 3-year run where he's been like a 5-win player on average. And yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if with a healthy season, he's like a 6-win player next year. Who's to say? But you consider all those factors, and then the fact that, you know, the Brewers, you got to be willing to deal him away then if you're not going to extend him before he hits free agency. From a relationship standpoint, would it suck to have a dispute going into his last season? Sure. He's probably not going to let that affect his play, though, because he's still going to want to show what his value is, and you know, he's going to want to make some money for himself. Guys aren't going to sabotage their own season because they're unhappy with how their arbitration case went. I think last year there was more incentive, just looking at all these factors at play from the outside. I think last year there was more incentive from the Brewers' perspective to just come to an agreement here and let's kind of kick this uncomfortable discussion about salary down the line another year. Well, now they are another year further, another year closer to the end of his tenure in Milwaukee. That same incentive might not be there now. Maybe this is where the Brewers say, hey, we're going to play the game. We're going to take you to a hearing. We don't, you know, even if we don't want things to go poorly, if they do, the reality is, from a business standpoint, there's just not a huge risk of loss here for us, especially if we already knew, like, we're probably not going to keep you beyond 2026, maybe at the very most beyond 2027. I would not be shocked, just based on all of that stuff, if there is a lower likelihood of the kind of agreement we saw last year.
Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. I think this was brought up to me by Jonathan Judge on Twitter. I think the one thing that I could buy a little bit here is that both last year and then potentially this year, what the Brewers could be trying to do is show MLB, hey, we offered him, you know, both years they've gone up to the record. We'll say it wasn't the record last year because of Posey, but it was in in reality, I mean, Posey had an MVP and then a World Series MVP season like that. It was, like you said, one of the best seasons of all time. In essence, they went up to the record last year. And then this year, they're doing the same. They're going up to the current record set by Will Smith. Could they be doing that as a sign of like, hey, this is what we're trying to do? And then you give them a similar type of deal with the team option. You throw it out there. It's a very similar type of thing where you're very unlikely to pick up the team option. It's very unlikely to be good value for you. But if it is, that means he had an insane season and you win out by getting a little bit of that money back in that regard. It wouldn't totally shock me if they went that route, or at least found some middle ground going that route. But my actual feel and opinion on it is more in line with what you're saying. I don't really expect that to happen. Now, we didn't expect it to happen last year when we talked about it either, and it did. So I won't rule it out, and I don't think it's a bad theory from Jonathan on that, but I just feel like everything you pointed out, the fact that there's not going to be a multi-year relationship following this in almost any scenario, like it feels very unlikely. I would put William Contreras in a similar type of tier of like clubhouse teammate, not quite to the Willy Adames level, but I think he's somebody that they definitely like having around. And he was somebody who last year seemed to really grow into a leadership role and be somebody who brings energy. And obviously everyone respects him going out there and playing with a broken finger and playing every day and doing all of those things. So like, if they weren't getting offers that they were completely excited about for him, I wouldn't be shocked if he played out his last season in Milwaukee and then got the qualifying offer and walked. That said, I think we're going to be talking about a guy who's a top 3 to 4 catcher almost without a doubt following next season, if not better. He's capable of being the best or second best easily. I think there'd be some pretty big offers out there for Contreras, and I think they're pretty likely to move on either way. So it feels like what we're looking at here is probably the last season we'll see from Contreras in a Brewers uniform. And I agree with you that even if the relationship soured, I don't think it would be a problem. I also don't really expect that to happen in this case. I know people picked up on the tweet and the wow with a couple emojis. I would like to remind people, William has been known to be a little bit of a Twitter troll throughout his Brewers career in the offseason. He's thrown out emojis pretty much every offseason of some sort. Now, I think that clearly was in reaction to the numbers and arbitration, but I also would not be overly concerned that he put that out there as some sort of sign that he's super upset and it's going to be a problem. Like, I don't anticipate that being the case. I think he's a little bit of a different personality compared to some of the others who have had some issues in the past. But again, like Jack talked about, if it does happen, he's not going to quit on the team. He's not going to suddenly stop playing hard or stop trying to perform, because he gains nothing from that. The money he's upset he didn't get, he won't get because he played worse. So he's going to lose out on more money by doing that. Like, I just don't ever see it trending that way. And even if it does, it's not going to cause problems for the Brewers. And yeah, I won't rehash all the extension stuff. I think that's exactly why we don't see him beyond 2026. And it'll be unfortunate. Like, I really like William Contreras. He's a very, very good player, but it's how the Brewers operate. And I think they've proven time and time again that it's a very effective way to operate. And they do a very good job of moving from one player to the next. It's kind of like they have different eras of players within 2 to 3 year stretches pretty consistently. And they keep reloading and they find these guys. They find new players who are going to take the mantle as the top guy. And, I would imagine Churio is going to be that guy. And then you have Mate coming after him, and you have others who are in the pipeline. Like, they'll find ways to replace that. This is what they do. They do it very well. It's just not something I think we need to be very concerned about, and I wouldn't be very concerned about as a fan.
Just to cover our bases here, I don't want to run through the entire explanation of how arbitration works, because we did that last year when the Brewers and Contreras were going through this process. For reference, if you did not catch that one and you genuinely want to hear us explain arbitration for about half an hour, that's episode 36 of the Brewer Fanatic podcast from exactly 1 year ago to the date. I just looked it back up. So right on. But we walked through it in more detail there. But the Cliff Notes version is, this is not like free agency, so you got to get this out of your head. Yes, of course, William Contreras is worth $9 million. He's worth $30+ million, but we are not talking about a system that is ever going to pay him $30+ million. We're talking about a system that is going to pay him based on what previous players in his position of his caliber have made under this same system. So those are the rules that Contreras is playing under. Those are the rules that the Brewers are playing under. That's why you see those two figures. If it was different, Contreras could have filed for $35 million and made a very good case that he deserves $35 million. But he's not going to do that because that's not realistic, because this is not free agency. The other part of this then, when we talk about precedent, that is why the Brewers are not just going to automatically cave to whatever he wants, because in reality, that would also be a steal. But again, different system. Because it's based on precedent and what the last guy made, if Contreras makes more than the last guy, that means the next guy after him makes more, and the next guy after him makes more, and the next guy after him makes more, because they can keep pointing back to each of these cases. So it's not just about the Brewers and William Contreras. It's about future catchers down the line. It's about how that system works for the Brewers with future players in the future. It's a whole big thing. It's completely different from free agency. That's the short version. Like I said, we explained it more about a year ago if you really want to hear it, but I understand why it's confusing for everybody, because I don't think everyone explains it great. Yeah. And when you just see these numbers, I understand why people get upset about it, but I would just encourage everyone, as with many things, if it's something that makes you mad right away and you don't understand it, try to see if you can find someone who will explain it to you, and just try to get a feel for it and then react off of that. And I understand that's maybe not always how sports fandom works, but as someone who tries to inform people on stuff, I would just encourage people to try to collect as much information as they can. And I get it, if no one is willing to or helps explain it to you, that's part of our jobs too. So, it's kind of a two-way street, but that is the way this works. And the last note then is, because the comp for this particular case, assuming they go to a hearing, and Mark Feinsand of MLB.com did report when these figures came out that the two sides are likely going to a hearing, the comp that both sides are probably going to be arguing for or against is Will Smith. So just to kind of take a very quick look at the two of these players, if you're watching on video, I've got the stat head player comp pulled up. I don't like using Baseball Reference WAR for catchers, because I think it sucks for catchers and it doesn't properly measure, especially on the defensive side, what all goes into making a good catcher. But I used it for this one specifically because the graphic is just way easier to find and it's easier to read. And number two, the actual WAR numbers are pretty close for these two guys compared to the better WAR numbers for catchers usually. And that's probably because these guys are both pretty good hitters. I think you see the differences more for defensive-minded catchers. But just to look at these two players, if you're not watching on video, I'll just very quickly summarize what we have here. Will Smith, through this point in his career, going into his second arbitration-eligible season, he had a 126 OPS plus, 91 career home runs, 306 RBIs. I don't think RBIs matter as an individual stat. We can have a discussion about that. Yes, as a team stat, I like to use runs, but individually, RBI, I don't think properly credits what a player is actually contributing to scoring runs. But it is still something that I think gets brought up in some ARB cases, because some of the stats they use are a little bit outdated, and that's a whole nother can of worms. Basically, Will Smith at this point in his career had slightly better rate stats than William Contreras and more home runs. Where Contreras has the edge is quite a few counting stats, but that really comes down to the fact that he at this point in his career has played 599 games. Will Smith at this point in his career had played in 484 games. So based on the fact that sometimes arbitration, you can use counting stats and accolades and things like that. He's got more all-star appearances than Will Smith had at this point, more silver sluggers than Will Smith had at this point. That's all stuff that can be brought up. But by and large, his argument would have to be, I think, the durability. I think that's really like the best thing that his camp would have to try to drive home to argue that he's been more valuable. Because remember, like he's 1.5 million basically over the existing precedent. So he really needs to prove, and his camp really needs to be able to prove that he is demonstrably better than Will Smith. And when you look at this, just the raw numbers, the durability looks like the one to go for. But there's a pretty important caveat in there too, because Will Smith's second season in Major League Baseball was the 2020 shortened season, the 60-game season. If you actually look at the percentage of his team's games that he played in through his up to his second season of arbitration, and you look at Contreras, they're actually very, very similar. It's about even. Now, maybe he's going to point to how many games he played in the last 2 years if you really want to drive home the durability case. But even what I think would be their best argument, you can cut into that pretty easily, which I'm sure the Brewers would, by saying, well, Smith had fewer games that he could have played in, so that doesn't really matter. So just kind of, looking at the way that these guys line up, and this is another reason why I would imagine the Brewers feel pretty good about going to a hearing on this one, maybe even better than they felt last year. I think it's going to be pretty hard for Contreras' camp to argue that he's been better. I think you can very easily argue he's been equally as good, maybe very slightly better, but are they going to be able to argue that he's $1.5 million better than Will Smith was? I don't know. It's going to be interesting. If I had to guess, though, I think the Brewers win this one.
Yeah, I do too. I think you could argue he's been slightly better. I think you could probably argue, because it was a couple years ago, maybe some inflation involved in terms of that type of thing, because it does seem to be getting involved in arbitration a little bit now, where you can't really pull something from years and years ago and say that that's the exact same thing. But this is still, we're only talking 2 seasons.
Yeah, this is a little different, I think, than like 5 years ago or something.
Right,
so.
right. So that's what I'm saying. Like, even if you use that argument, you can't use it for much. Like, it's very minimal. Yeah, I think maybe they just overplayed their hand a little bit. Like, I think they could have potentially won this if they were closer. If it was less than $1 million, maybe, and they were, more in that 9.3 range, somewhere in that range. Like, I think they'd have a real argument. I think they have a legitimate argument that he's been better. But like you said, $1.5 million more, I don't know that you can make that argument and do it in a way that's actually believable and agreeable. It feels like one that the Brewers win if it does make it to case. And I think it's going to, like we talked about already. And at that point, I think that's what we're looking at. I think it ends up going the Brewers' direction. And like I said, I don't think it's going to be a big problem. I think William Contreras is probably pretty well aware of what the circumstances are, but they probably feel like they have a good argument. And if you do look at the graphic that Jack has up, like the accolades, the counting stats, you can make an argument. And those are things that play at arbitration hearings still. Unfortunately, I don't think they should, but that's just the way it is. And it's understandable to a degree, because when you're talking about precedent, that's what you have to fall back on. A lot of these stats, newer stats, weren't taken into account originally. So how are you going to compare to the old with the new when the whole point is precedent? Like, I get how that can be kind of a double-edged sword, but in the end, I do think the Brewers went out and they'll just go into the season with, $8.5 million, and he'll still be at the record that was set by Will Smith, which is, frankly, I think pretty reasonable.
Well, that's enough arbitration talk for now.
Yes.
Instead, we'll switch gears a little bit and we'll talk about the latest on Freddy Peralta. So Ken Rosenthal a while back said on Foul Territory that he felt the return for Freddy Peralta could be a little bit more than what the Brewers got for Corbin Burns, which I think largely aligns with what we've talked about. It kind of needs to be Corbin Burnes plus, probably one more piece on there at least compared to what the Brewers got for Burnes. Freddie's cheaper. Freddie's been very durable. Freddie's, I would imagine there's at least some chance that he'd be willing to listen to an extension offer if he thinks it's enticing. Freddie's got a little bit more of a reputation as a clubhouse guy. Just all of these kind of things, I think, would drive the value up a little bit beyond what the Brewers got back for Burnes. Rosenthal would later, with The Athletic in a story, list the Mets as perhaps the best trade partner for the Brewers just based on the pieces that they have. A quick look at some other teams. There were some rumblings about maybe the Yankees being involved. They're probably out now after they traded for Ryan Weathers of the Marlins, and they gave away a 4 prospect package for him. The Red Sox have been rumored to be a potential fit. They just signed Ranger Suarez. Does that take them officially out of the trade market? No, because they didn't give up any capital there, but they also swung a decently big trade for William Contreras, or Wilson Contreras, a few weeks ago. The Orioles, who the Brewers did business with for Burnes a couple of years ago, they traded a big package for Shane Baz. The Braves are a team that maybe they could be in the mix yet. They have a couple pieces. One report from Hector Gomez said the Padres are emerging as a strong contender. I don't know if I would really give that much credibility because Preller is once again gutted their farm system, which will probably somehow be built up again by next year, only for him to gut it again. How does he still have a job, man? I don't understand the way that they operate that team, but I mean, they win games. I said this to you, though. I feel like they could probably win slightly more games with maybe a third of the massive turnover that they seem to need every single year because they got the farm system for just looking kind of right in front of them, and then they need to reshuffle those chairs on the deck, and it is just, I don't know, but that's an ass side. Those are the teams that have been kind of listed as a maybe and just kind of the status on them. It just feels like one by one, these guys are starting to go in different directions. So we've talked about this plenty. I'm still 30% chance he gets dealt, 70% chance I think he stays. Spencer, I know you're a little bit higher than that, but that's the latest.
Yeah, the John Heyman did throw out the Giants as a potential suitor as well recently. They're not one that, when I look at their roster and their prospects, that there seems like there's a great fit. It would depend on how the Brewers view some of their upper level pitching, I would imagine. And, the Carson Whisenhunt types of the world and those, I don't think he can headline a deal, but maybe there's a way to work a deal where he's involved and they view him as someone who could help the Brewers major league team this year. I'm not sure, but yeah, the Yankees still keep getting listed even after the Weathers trade. And I do know that some of the Yankees writers and people were talking about how they wanted to add Weathers, but they were viewing it as somebody that, like, he could make starts when they're inevitably not healthy, but they're not necessarily slotting him into their rotation as somebody that they view as like a true, absolutely in the rotation type, which for the price they paid is surprising to me. But that's also one of the perks of being the Yankees and being able to go out and sign the Garrett Coles and everybody, Rodons, the Max Frieds, everybody that they sign. And part of it is actually that they did mention that they don't want to get too lefty heavy by having Weathers be in the rotation as well, because they do have Fried and Rodon, and they don't want to get too far that way. So I guess I wouldn't rule them out, but to me, it still feels unlikely or less likely now that trade has happened. Yet the Red Sox haven't really been tied a lot lately anyway. And yeah, the Suarez deal just feels like that they added Sonny Gray this offseason as well, I think. Or did he go elsewhere? No, he went to the Red Sox, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Sonny Gray trade. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. They've kind of felt out for a while. Like you said, Orioles have kind of felt out since that Shane Baz trade. The Braves are interesting because they do have major league ready players that they could move. Their farm system isn't very good comparatively to a lot of these other teams, but they do have some interesting guys. They have some major league players. They have some guys who are on the edge of the big leagues that are interesting. So maybe something could happen there. Maybe that would make some sense. I agree. I don't know how the Padres would work. They don't have anybody that makes sense in a Freddy Peralta trade, at least from what our understanding is of what the Brewers normally would want in a Freddy Peralta type trade. They don't have anyone who fits that bill. I mean, Randy Vasquez is probably your closest, and he's not headlining a Freddy Peralta trade. I like Randy Vasquez. I find him interesting. I would take him as a throw-in, but I would not have him headlining a Freddy Peralta trade. So, yeah, it's interesting. I do still feel, I even tweeted it out this past week, like I'm still feeling kind of 60-40 on it happening. But I think it's going to kind of come out of nowhere, and it's just going to happen. I do think the Mets are the team that line up the best, and we can get into the questions we got because the Mets are brought up a couple times here. But to me, they feel like the best match. The only interesting thing for me is we know David Stearns. David Stearns doesn't normally pay much for rentals. Even with the Mets, that's not really been his MO. But we'll see. I mean, the other part of it, you mentioned the extension. Perhaps a team like the Mets with a Pobo like David Stearns, who Freddie's very familiar with and knows well and worked one extension out with already, that could be a team that he would be pretty open to extending with. So maybe that's part of the equation too. And, technically you're not allowed to negotiate with a player before a trade is made or anything, but teams can talk to agents anytime they want. And they can work those things out a little bit backdoor if they need to. So it wouldn't be shocking to me if that were part of the equation too, but I think that would up the value for the Brewers too. So I'm sure the Brewers would be happy to see a team extending a player or being willing to make a trade only if they can extend Freddie, because that most likely means they'd get more in return too. So yeah, I guess we could take it to the questions with that though.
I'll pair two of them together. Sprawl135 on Twitter asks, what would be an acceptable package for Freddie from the Mets or the Dodgers? We'll get back to Dodgers in a minute. We'll just focus on Mets now. And then the Ginger asked, of the teams that have reported interest for Freddie, any specific players that you would be more excited about? Any that you are out on and don't want? Personally, he's out on the Mets guys, including Tong and Reimer specifically. And he thinks that the Yankees pitchers all have more meat on the bone. Spencer, as our resident prospect expert, do you have anybody that's on your mind?
Yeah, so I guess I'm in a different boat on Tong. I do agree on Reimer. He's not somebody that I would be super interested in. I think he's very similar to what the Brewers have as corner infield prospects at the moment already. Maybe kind of questionable if he can stick at third. Pretty good bat, but probably ending up at first. Sounds a lot like a lot of guys in the Brewer system right now. I like Tong. I like Tong's stuff a lot. I think he's got a really interesting delivery that I think you could have a lot of fun with in a good pitching organization like the Brewers. I like Brandon Sproat quite a bit. I'd be very interested in a guy like that as a big part of the deal. Jet Williams is about as Brewersy a prospect as you can get at 5'7". That is a guy that fits the Brewers, but he's a fun player who actually probably can stick at shortstop, and also I would imagine with his speed and athleticism could probably play some outfield, play all around the infield. Those are all guys I'd be very interested in from the Mets. I like Carlos LaGrange from the Yankees. That's kind of it for their pitching. I like Will Warren, but I'm not sure he'd be somebody I'd want headlining a Freddy Peralta deal. Elmer Rodriguez Cruz, I think he's solid, but he doesn't really scream anything more than like a back end of the rotation type to me. The Yankees are tougher for me than the Mets, but I get the appeal a little bit with the Yankees, and I get why there are concerns with some of these Mets players, but for me, I see the Mets as the better fit between those two. As for an acceptable trade package from the Mets or the Dodgers, well, first of all, the Dodgers just signed Kyle Tucker, so the rich get richer.
I was going to bring that up after
the player
you were done,
department
done
there, but
the question.
Yeah, I was seeing it right as I was talking. So, maybe they're really going to push all in because this is a short-term deal. They want to keep winning World Series while they have their core, which, to be fair, their core is getting pretty old in the Mookie department and Freddie Freeman. Like this is kind of a point where they probably are going to continue pushing in with all the money backloaded and the deferred money and everything else. So maybe the Dodgers still fall as a potential package. I also don't love their system as much as people nationally do. I feel like they tend to get the benefit of the doubt on a lot of prospects that actually just aren't that great.
And they usually flip those guys because they know they're not good.
Oh, they're smart. Yeah, they know it. They kind of let the hype machine play its part, and then they flip them for a nice major league piece, and it works out much better for them.
How many guys have the Dodgers traded away who were like, this guy was randomly a top 50 prospect?
Yep.
And they flip him away for what doesn't even seem like a great return, but they bring in like a rental or something at the deadline and they trade that guy away for him. And then this guy never does anything at the big league level.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I even think back to the Machado trade back in 2018. Like, nobody from that trade worked out for the Orioles at all. Michael Busch is honestly the one guy who they've moved to, who worked out really well for the other team. But they also got a very good return in return because they got two pretty big prospects for them right now who, yeah, I mean, they got some legit players in that deal too. So it was a reasonable trade for them. And they had a 40
even that one was like, where was Busch going to play? They had Freeman at first, and Busch probably wasn't going to play second or third at that point. Like,
yes, it worked out.
They know what they're doing. I'll give them credit for that. They really do.
Well, that's always the thing with the Dodgers. Like we talk about it. People always are upset about the payroll, everything else. Would the Dodgers be a juggernaut without the payroll? No. Would the Dodgers be a really good organization without the payroll? Yes. They do a lot of really, really good things on the baseball side of things. They're a very smart and well-run organization who drafts well. And then, like we've just talked about, they know when to flip their guys. They know who to keep. They do a really good job on that stuff. So I give them a lot of credit. I think a lot more credit than people want to give them because, yes, the money helps make up for a lot of things, but they do a lot of really good things outside of it. Either way, that's straying from the point. They're not a team I'd be thrilled to deal with. And still, like, that brings me back to the Mets. And I still think you're looking for a deal that feels like an overpay. And to me, that's one of Tong or Brandon Sproat, a Jet Williams type of guy who could be a big league middle infield shortstop option this year, potentially. I don't think Carson Bench gets moved. That was my draft crush 2 years ago. The Brewers passed on him for Braylon Payne. The Mets took him. Now he's kind of a consensus top 25 prospect in baseball. I like Braylon Payne, so I'm not complaining, but that is a guy that I would really, really like to have. I don't think he moves for Freddy Peralta, though. So to me, I think I'm looking at like two of those guys. Another interesting, probably younger player. The Mets don't have any like comp picks that they can move, so maybe then there's an extra lottery pick on top of that, or lottery ticket type player on top of that. But that's kind of what I'd be looking at. And I think that'd be pretty reasonable. I think you'd get a guy who immediately slots into your rotation between Sproat or Tong. I put Tong ahead of Sproat, but there are fans of both for sure. That's kind of what I look at. That's kind of the package I'm hoping for if a deal is made. I'll take the other. Jonah asked about the Yankees too a little bit, and Jason Dominguez, if he would fit as an MLB ready outfielder for the Brewers. He kind of talked about if the Yankees re-sign Bellinger, he figures they would be willing to ship Dominguez, who in his opinion still has a high ceiling with the bat. He says Dominguez plus Rodriguez, Cruz, Cunningham, Hess, a couple other pitchers there who I was interested in both of them as college pitchers a couple of years ago and last year. So like, I wouldn't mind those types, but I would just say this on Dominguez. I don't ever see the Brewers being interested in Jason Dominguez. He's just kind of the anti-Brewer in a lot of ways. He is unplayable in the outfield. I mean, just horrendous out there. It is a really, really bad glove in the outfield. There's a decent amount of whiff. There's some strikeout. I think there's absolutely power. There's absolutely ability with the bat. He's only 22, I believe, right now. So, like, the bat is still interesting. And honestly, if Christian Yelich's contract was up, maybe they'd be more interested in a guy like that with the fallback of like, hey, this could be our long-term DH, and we only play him in the outfield, kind of like Yelich, as needed. I think it's really hard to make it work with both of them on the roster. I just don't think he'd be a Brewers guy. I could see the Yankees moving him for sure. I don't think he'd be a Brewers guy. So yeah, I hopefully that kind of covered all of them. But for me, I just always keep coming back to the Mets. The only team that also was mentioned that I think could end up lining up in an interesting way is the Braves. And that one is more hope, I guess, reliant. But like if they were willing to move on from a guy like Michael Harris, who struggled with the bat last year, maybe doesn't necessarily at this point look like somebody they view as like their future center fielder for the long term, but he's got the nice years of control at a very reasonable price. If they could headline a deal with someone like him, use J.R. Ritchie, some sort of major league, almost major league ready pitcher, maybe a deal could work with them. But yeah, I keep coming back to the Mets. For me, that's the best fit. The question I keep having though is will David Stearns pay for a rental? Pay that much for a rental, I should say.
Do you see what Tucker's contract is with LA?
Holy, I just did.
It just Bob Murray just came through with it.
Yep.
Oh boy.
Wow.
So I saw I think it was Heyman who said it was a short term. So when I saw a short term deal, I was like, so obviously there's going to be all the conversations now about the Dodgers buying everybody and what does this mean for baseball and salary cap and revenue and all the 9 yards. But when I saw Heyman say short term, there was like a part of me that was like, let's hold off here. Maybe there's a chance that this is just the player wants to go to a very good team and it's actually not about the money that much. No, he's going to make $60 million a year for 4 years. That's why he's signing there. Maybe I'm sure he wants to go to a team that is winning World Series left and right too. But $60 million a year, 4 year, $240 million.
Oh man.
Yikes. Oh man. This is not great for well, there was going to be a lockout anyway, but this is going to add more. It's another thing that certain people can point to. I'll say that.
It certainly is. Can I just say, in this, I know some people do agree with me because I had people agree with me on Twitter when I said this, but I don't think that this is actually that bad for baseball. I love the David versus Goliath idea in sports. It's always been something that really draws me to sports. Upsets in March Madness. That's why everyone loves March Madness, right? Because you get to see, once in a while you see a 16 upset of one, but you see some 15s make a couple runs. You see those underdog teams. I, as a fan and as somebody who, as Jack and I have both talked about a lot, like I like to view the game through the lens of a front office, a GM, how to maneuver the roster, how to make moves, how to do things to make the team better in, maybe really marginal ways. I kind of love it when the Dodgers get better because it actually just makes it feel, I just like to imagine the idea of beating the Dodgers in a playoff series and how much better that would feel if you do that with a quarter of the salary on your roster. Like, and you do it in a way that you just obviously in the playoffs, there's randomness involved. Mm-hmm. It's just part of it for me. Like as a fan, that's always been part of the draw for me. I like having the separation of a bunch of teams. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there's a point where it gets just absurd and you got to find a way to at least detract from teams wanting to do this or being able to do this. And I've talked about before, but like the Dodgers TV deal is $330 million a year. The Brewers currently don't have one. And when they do, I don't think it's ever gotten above like 32 million. So like a tenth, like 10% of the Dodgers TV deal, which already puts you at an insane disadvantage. There's revenue sharing involved, but the Dodgers also partially got around that because they filed for bankruptcy not too long ago. And they actually don't pay as much as other teams do because it was part of the agreement. So they actually get more of their TV revenue than most big markets do, which, yeah. So to me, I'm anti-salary cap. We've already, I don't know enough to really go super in depth on CBA stuff, but my general overarching thoughts are I'm anti-salary cap, but I am pro figuring out a way to redistribute TV deals in a much more even way, because I genuinely think that's where the biggest difference in everything is. And I know that's why MLB actually wants to try and get everybody off of the regional networks and get it to it's the blackouts, but it's also they would like to be able to redistribute the money in an even way rather than have this huge discrepancy between everybody. It's why I'm kind of hoping that eventually does happen. I think it would make a bigger difference than people would ever realize if that happened. But at the same time, I think this is funny. I think it's insane that the Dodgers can just go give $60 million to Kyle Tucker. And if the Brewers do beat them, it's just going to make it even better for me. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm having a hard time at this point watching this and saying, "Yep, this is good for the product of the league as a whole."
Oh, it's probably not.
It's not. I don't think it's good when everybody and their grandma can tell you at the start, like 2 years ago, they could have told you this is where Kyle Tucker was going to end up, and
yeah,
I think it takes some of the fun out of it when it feels like there is realistically no legitimate bidding war for a guy. Like you know how this is going to end, and it ended how everybody thought it was going to end. And yeah, I mean, I'm with you. There's always going to be the people who say, "Oh, anyone can do this." Well, that's a little bit disingenuous. Yes, teams could pay as much as the Dodgers are for some of these guys. The difference is that teams can't do this while still making the amount of money teams cannot do this while still being in the green to the extent that the Dodgers are.
Yes.
And everybody's going to point to, well, sign good players and then you make more money off of playoff revenue because you win more playoff games. Okay, but that's still not the amount of the kind of cash that we're talking about here. Like, could the Brewers, if they really wanted to, decide that they want to cut into the amount of profit they make or the amount of money that they take away, that they come home with, and sign Kyle Tucker for $60 million? They probably could. But the Brewers are not going to be able to, no matter how many games they win, they're not going to be able to find a TV deal that pays them what the Dodgers TV deal pays them. They play in Milwaukee. They're in the smallest market in Major League Baseball. So, yes, like you said, I think the issue is that there's a revenue disparity from team to team, and a lot of it comes down to these TV deals. I'm not mad at the Dodgers. Like, the Dodgers have the ability to do this. They probably should be doing this. Like, if you had what are you supposed to say no? Like, this isn't the Dodgers' fault.
Nope.
They have these resources and they're using them. Like, that, you'd be foolish not to. But yeah, and you're right. I don't think a salary cap fixes a lot of the problems here. And like, you got to go about this in a way that it's not screwing over the players. But this is starting to get to some pretty extreme proportions. Like, it's just not entertaining to me. I could see how for some people it might be entertaining to see all the stars on one team. But there are 30 teams in Major League Baseball. To me, it just takes out some of the fun of the viewing experience when everybody's on one team, because that means there's now 29 other teams that all these guys are not on. And I think the product gets worse overall from this. But again, it's not the Dodgers' fault. It's like, I understand why people are upset. I think there's a lot of anger that's going in the wrong directions, and people might be blaming some of the wrong things. And then, the people who, to use, for lack of a better word, defend it more, I think they're also pointing to things that are kind of disingenuous. It's kind of like a half truth. So yeah, not shocking, but that's a fun tangent.
Yeah. And other huge news, Gavin Lux is on the move again.
Aston sent both of those tweets out within like 45 seconds of each other.
I know. Actually, I need to look at that and see how many likes and what the comparison is on the amount of interaction he's gotten between the two of those. Okay, we've got 15,000 likes on the Tucker one, 4,500. I mean, Passan puts out a tweet, it's going to get likes, but still a third of the attention as the Kyle Tucker signing. But yeah, Gavin Lux, local legend, on his way. Let's see, he's going to the Rays. I'm having trouble reading this and following along, but the Angels get Josh Lowe, Brock Burke to the Reds, Gavin Lux and Chris Clark to the Rays. So we won't be seeing Gavin Lux as often as we did this year, because it felt like he was on my TV all the time. I know it's a divisional opponent, but I just remember Gavin Lux batting like constantly this year. I don't know what it was. And he's done well against the Brewers, it feels like, when he's played them. So
rolling out there against a bunch of righties who don't throw changeups.
This is true. Yeah,
it happens. But all right, we should probably get back to some actual Brewers related topics. A lot of action around Major League Baseball on this Thursday night. A couple of listener questions that we'll take for the next few minutes here. We'll start with Andrew. Spencer, you were talking about divisional games. We're going to go from the Reds to the Cubs. Andrew asks, with the Cubs acquisitions, how much, if at all, do you think they improved over last year's team? Well, I think their lineup's better with Alex Bregman in it in 2026. I don't know how well that contract is actually going to work for them for the duration of it, because I would not be shocked if you're probably getting like the last one or two of Bregman's truly, really good seasons. And then, after that, are you paying a lot of money for a guy who's more like a 105 WRC plus kind of hitter for the rest of that deal? But I think there's still quite a bit of juice left in that bat for at least the next year or two. So, they're better in their lineup with him out there than they were with Matt Shaw, who now is probably going to be one of like the best utility players in the league, because he's going to be able to bounce around. And he was an average hitter as a rookie last year. So outside of that, though, I'm not sure how much they've actually improved. It just feels like there's kind of been not a lot of action, but the things that they have done have, I think, more just kind of filled some gaps to kind of keep them where they were at. So,
Yeah.
They'd probably pick up a couple wins with Bregman in tow, but I don't think they like massively transformed the outlook of their team, where they're now like runaway favorites over the Brewers, even though there's probably going to be some people who are expecting that. I still think that it's kind of a matter of like these teams are differently constructed a little bit. Cubs are obviously still going to be a better power team than the Brewers, I think, unless they have quite a few guys in Milwaukee who break out in the power department. They're still going to be really good at defense like the Brewers are. Brewers, I think, are probably a little bit better on the pitching side. These two teams are going to be very, very close again. Let's just put it that way. And I don't know that anything the Cubs have done make them a clear-cut favorite over the Brewers right now. I think they're both still very close.
Yeah, you did. I know we just talked about him for like 15 minutes, but you did fail to mention that they lost Kyle Tucker in the lineup. So the trade-off of Bregman and Tucker, like for me, I think Tucker's a better hitter, but what Tucker gave them last year is probably not too far off from around what Bregman will give them this year. So in terms of like, would I rather have Tucker in my lineup than Bregman in 2026? Yes, but in terms of what they're replacing in value, because Tucker was dealing with some injuries last year and really fell off in the second half. Yeah, I would say it comes out pretty even, maybe even slightly ahead for this year or two of Bregman's kind of end of his prime, I would imagine. The Edward Cabrera trade just doesn't move me much. Like, I think he's interesting. I think he's going to play better in front of that defense where he's going to have, it's going to be much better defense than he got from the Marlins. But I do also wonder about a guy who gave up quite a bit of loud contact playing in a place like in Wrigley, and potentially, when that wind's blowing out, he could be somebody you see give up a decent amount of homers. It's a decent ground ball rate, but a decent fly ball rate too. Like it's kind of average-ish in those regards. They've added to the pen in some decent ways. Like I agree. I think they're pretty much, I view both them and the Brewers as kind of those upper 80s in terms of wins teams right now. Very similar in terms of their build. One of them is probably pretty likely to win low 90s, while the other wins upper 80s. That's just kind of the way it swings when you play each other as many times as you do in the division. But in terms of talent, in terms of rosters, like you said, different construction, different ways that they're built. But overall, I just think the overall talent level is pretty similar. And the Brewers tend to get a little bit more out of their talent than other teams do. So maybe that gives them a slight edge right now. But yeah, in the end, I would say they're kind of holding steady, and that was a team that was a good team that could compete and make the playoffs and hold their own in the division. And I don't think that's a bad thing for them, but I also don't think they're really any better than they were last year.
Just looking at so I mentioned like the Chicago's offense, I would say, is better than the Brewers, but then you get to the starting rotation. Matt Boyd's 35, coming off a career year at 34. What are you going to get out of him?
Mm-hmm.
I think Imanaga's probably cooked. I was actually a little surprised that he even came back.
Yeah.
On the qualifying offer. I thought that they were just going to kind of cut ties with him completely, because I liked him a couple of years ago, like the potential of how that arsenal could work, but I don't think it's really played out that way. And I think you could start to see some of the flaws in that arsenal get exposed down the stretch last year. So I'm a little surprised that he's back. I don't think he's going to be anything special. Tyone is 34, and he's like, he had decent results last year, but I still kind of see him as like more of a Colin Ray type pitcher, where it's like, yeah, that, that's a very useful guy, like 4 ERA, mix and match, kitchen sink, but that's a guy you need on your rotation, but he's not going to blow anybody away. Like nobody's scared of Colin Ray. So Cabrera is an interesting one. I'm still worried about the fact that he's 28 years old and he does not seem to have a very good fastball. Neither one of his fastballs have gotten really good results. So I'm kind of curious to see what they do with that. I think if they can fix that, that's probably when things would start taking off for him. So, the Cubs have gotten better at pitching development over the last few years. So I think they're capable of that, but it'll be interesting to see. I forgot they signed Tyler Austin back to the big leagues too, Brewers legend.
That's right. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, this is a good team. It's constructed differently from the Brewers, but yeah, they've made a lot of moves, I think, to stay pretty much at the level they were at last year. And again, I think Bregman has a decent chance of giving them a little more than what Tucker gave them last year, but you're right, Tucker's a better hitter than him talent-wise and what they're probably going to produce this year. But yeah, just differently constructed teams in a couple of different ways, but I don't think the needle has really been moved as far as the divisional standings.
Yep.
Next question that we're going to take here comes from Tyler. So Tyler asked this before the news broke that Willie Castro on Thursday afternoon signed a 2-year deal with the Rockies. But we were going to take this question anyway, and we'll still quickly kind of go over what our answer was. He said, what are your thoughts on Willie Castro as a free agent target? I think the fit is there, not just as a veteran presence, but also insurance at multiple positions in case of injuries. Still feel like there should be a challenge to Joey Ortiz's lack of a bat too. So Willie Castro is a utility guy. He has played all over the field. The problem is he's been bad all over the field. I'm just going to rattle off his career defensive numbers. At second base for his career, he has a -14 defensive runs saved and a -2 fielding run value. At shortstop, -23 DRS and -5 fielding run value. At third base, -1 and -1. In left field, -3. He's got +4 in left field for fielding run value based on outs above average. Center field, -6, -1. Right field, 0 and -2. So he has not been a good defender anywhere, especially at shortstop. He should probably never be playing shortstop. So he's not really a challenge to Joey Ortiz if he would have signed here. And then the bat is, I don't know, he kind of fluked his way into a couple of decent seasons on offense, but I've never really liked his bat. He's always been, I don't have the numbers up in front of me right now. I was looking at him earlier on Thursday afternoon, but I think he's always been kind of he's just needed a fluky high BABIP to get to good results because plate discipline's not very good. He chases a lot. He swings and misses a decent amount, which, when you're talking about bad swing decisions and bad defense, those are the two things that the Brewers like the most. And Willie Castro, those are his weaknesses. So I don't think there was ever much of a fit there. But to kind of compare him to Ortiz, there's steamer projections for 2026. Castro is projected to slash 234, 311, 369. That's a 91 WRC plus, so 9% worse on offense than the average hitter. 1.1 F-WAR. Joey Ortiz, his projection from the same system and the same model is 249, 313, 382. That's a 95 WRC plus, so 95 to Castro's 91. And then 2 F-WAR to Castro's 1.1 F-WAR. So a guy who is bad at the things that the Brewers like for their players to be good at. And there are at least some projections. I think Joey Ortiz is going to be the better player in 26 anyways. So I understand it. Utility guy, veteran, all that kind of stuff. But I don't think he was ever really the kind of player that would have fit well with the types that the Brewers like to bring in.
Yeah, even at the deadline last year, he was a guy that I think a lot of people were super interested in. And obviously the Cubs went out and got him, and that made people upset in the moment. He didn't have a very good finish to the season with the Cubs. I know he hit a homer against the Brewers at one point, but it was like one of the first hits he had as a Cub, and we were talking like 3 weeks into his tenure with the team. So, yeah, he's a guy who I think he's fine to have on most rosters. He's probably going to give you positive value in the end. But overall, in terms of, like you just said, what the Brewers like and what the Brewers value, he just doesn't fit a ton. I mean, it's not the same as Dominguez, but it's kind of the same principle where it's just not really a guy that I would ever envision the Brewers going out and bringing in. But he does fit for somebody like the Rockies, where he signed a team that, they need at-bats from decent quality big leaguers. They get a guy who could maybe get traded if he's having a solid first half like he did last year. Did he make the All-Star team last year, or was that 2 years ago? I know I'm pretty sure he made an All-Star team, which is pretty wild, but I want to say it was in 2025. I can't remember for sure, but it might have been 2024. 24. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But he obviously had a solid first half last year before the trade too. And then, I don't think it went very well with the Cubs overall, but he's just not somebody that fits with what the Brewers do. I don't think he's a bad player overall. I don't think he's a guy that teams shouldn't bring into the roster, or he should be signing minor league deals, but it's just a tough fit for what the Brewers like and what they do and what their roster kind of already has. It's one that I don't really ever anticipate them bringing in.
Aaron asked us, with Trent Grisham hitting 30 bombs last year and Eric Lauer pitching well late last year with Toronto, why were the Brewers not able to maximize these players' skill sets? Did they give up on both of these players too early? So I'll talk about Lauer first, I guess. I mean, he had a good year with Toronto, but that was also not a full season. The Brewers did get almost 2 full seasons of pretty good results level production out of him. So I think you could actually make the case that the Brewers did maximize his skill set more than the Blue Jays have so far. The only thing I looked at with him that was a little bit different is it looked like his cutter was a lot better with the Blue Jays than it was with the Brewers shape-wise. So maybe that's the one thing that they unlocked there. But other than that, I think a lot of his arsenal and the way he was getting guys out looked pretty similar to what he was doing in Milwaukee anyway. So I don't know so much about that one. Grisham, I still think part of that is he just didn't fit great into the Brewers outfield picture at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they had plenty of depth, and that was kind of right around when you knew like those next wave of guys were coming up. And, I think they just kind of took that opportunity to move on from him and be able to bring in a couple of guys who they felt could help them elsewhere. So I don't think they gave up on either one of those guys too early. And like with Grisham too, I think with his profile, he's always going to be a little bit prone to just being very up and down, because that's not the first time that Trent Grisham has looked really, really good when everything is clicking. He had that season right after the trade with the Padres. He was almost a 3-win player in like 60 games in the 2020 shortened season. So, we've seen that that's in there when things are going well for him. But he's always been a guy who he's had some issues with the strikeouts a couple of years. Like, I think he's just always going to be one of those guys who's, when it's good, it's good. And when it's not so good, the bat's going to look a little ugly. So I think for both of those guys, I'm very curious to see what they do next year. I think this would be an easier question to revisit if both of those guys can follow up what they did in 2025. Back to the Grisham point, though, like, I do think it was kind of telling that he ended up sticking with the Yankees, because didn't he take a qualifying offer from them?
Yep.
That seems a little bit telling to me that the market probably was not going to be there. Like, other teams are probably not quite buying into what he did. So it'll be interesting to see what those two guys do. I haven't looked at Grisham's trends yet either. Like, I don't know how much of those home runs are also him taking advantage of that porch in Yankee Stadium that's not at AmFam Field. So just a couple of different things to think of there.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking, since the Trent Grisham trade, we're talking 6 years now. He hit free agency. He was only on the Brewers, if you remember, for 3 months on the big league team. Obviously, he was drafted and came through the Brewers development system and everything else. But he only played for the Brewers for about 2.5 months, and he really only played as much as he did because Yelich fouled the ball off of his knee. I don't think well, the other part of this too is they traded Grisham to acquire Lauer, so there's really no way you can fully tie and say you should have had both of them, because you probably don't get Eric Lauer at any point if you don't trade Grisham. Now, I think the main piece in that deal was Luis Urias. That was kind of seen as two prospects who maybe don't fit with the direction their teams are going, and they're kind of swapping teams, and two guys who are ready to play in the big leagues but maybe don't have a position on the big league roster for either team. They swapped them. Urias also showed pretty well one season, and then obviously it never really stuck around. Grisham was similar until this past season where he broke out. But yeah, I know Yankees fans aren't thrilled that he took the qualifying offer. Most of them were kind of ready to move on. And don't get me wrong, Yankees fans, not necessarily the most reasonable fan base in the world, I guess, to say it in a nice way. But still, I think I saw some people talking about, short porch. I don't know if the numbers bear that out. I also haven't looked at it, but it seemed like Yankees fans seemed to think it was a big part of the equation for him. And they were all pretty surprised and kind of upset that he got the qualifying offer. So we will see how that plays out, but I'm with you. I think if they repeat what they did in 25, then maybe it's a different conversation. But again, it's just so far removed at this point. I think it'd be hard for me to argue that, yeah, they should have held on to him to get the payoff, way down the line when they're out of options and they're running into free agency. Like, I don't know.
I just pulled up his spray chart. It looks like he hit 34 homers last year. Maybe 5 of them look like porch homers.
Okay.
Or 6 or 7 maybe, but like, even if you take 6 or 7 off that total, that's still 27 bombs. Like, I'm looking at the chart. He's got quite a few. Yes, there's a lot of pull, but a lot of those pulled ones cleared by a pretty decent margin.
That's fair. How many did you say? 6, 7? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
I want to say things that I'm not allowed to say on this podcast.
That's why I say it now.
It's a family-friendly podcast. Why don't you just talk about the international signings and close us out that way?
All right. I will do that. These kids are 16, 17 years old. No, I'm done with that. I will never make that joke again on the podcast, but I knew I could annoy Jack with it, so I had to pull it out when I had the chance. Anyway, moving to the international signing day that we had today, the Brewers signed 22 players today. I was trying to look back. I think that's the lowest I could find since like pre-David Stearns, or at least the David Stearns era, once they had fully integrated their own international scouting team. And not to get too far into it, but like, these kids are agreeing to contracts well before signing day. And I'm talking years before. They're getting scouted at 12, 13, 14 years old to agree to these deals down the line. So the kids that we saw signed today at 16 or 17 years old, they are not just recently discovered players that the Brewers have come across, or any team across the league has come across. These have been worked out for a long time. I've discovered 5 players that have 2029 agreements in place. They won't be signing until 2029 with the Brewers. So it's a weird, kind of uncomfortable, at times a little gross system, but it's what it is, and everyone operates this way. Anyway, moving into the more exciting part of the day. The Brewers signed some bigger names in terms of the prospect rankings that are out there. Diego Frontado got their biggest bonus at $1.6 million. He was 24th on MLB Pipeline's rankings. This is a switch hitter who has been tied to the Brewers for a long time. Even publicly, even got some decent notoriety when he first agreed. He's a player that Baseball America says is trending up as he hits the actual signing day. And is as abnormal as it is to say for an international player, he has a pretty high floor in the context of the international class. Super mature approach, very good instincts, just a smart baseball player. It's a right-handed swing. It's a good approach in terms of plate discipline, in terms of not chasing, not whiffing much. There's some pop in the bat. Some scouts do think he could be a 20-plus homer guy, but it's probably hit over power in terms of likelihood of what ends up being his calling card on offense. Above average speed, good actions at shortstop, but an okay arm, so not sure he ends up sticking at short. But either way, a really nice, again, for an international signing, a higher floor type of guy. Jose Rodriguez is the second highest bonus at $1.5 million, a shortstop out of Venezuela. His value is very much tied to his defense, where he is considered arguably if the best defensive shortstop in the class. Really good actions, really good arm, just a lot of things going for him on defense. Now at the plate, it's definitely hit over power. There's not much pop there. He's a big enough guy where maybe he starts to grow into some power, but it's a really short swing that looks catered to trying to hit line drives. I worry a little bit about the bat, honestly. But if the bat does come around, you could kind of be looking at like that Orlando Arcia rise to prospectum in terms of actual notoriety, because he's mostly glove, but if the bat comes around, he's not similar to Arcia. It's probably average speed. And that's before he kind of starts to put on some muscle and some mass, and you never know if he'll lose a little bit of that. So if the bat comes around, you could see it. Otherwise, he's one of those guys who could maybe end up just being a Nick Ahmed, that type of guy, because the glove is really, really good. But obviously, all these guys have a really, really long ways to go. The most fun name and probably the highest ceiling player in this class is Ricky Moniz. This dude... You could find his name spelled no less than 5 different ways between the first and the last name. It ended up being R-I-C-K-I and then Monies. There were versions without the S at the end of Monies. There was E-Y. There was just Y for Ricky. There were so many versions out there. It turns out this is the official name, R-I-C-K-I, Monies. He's out of the Dominican Republic. He ranked 20th on MLB Pipeline's ranking, so the highest of any Brewer, actually. This is your power guy in this class. He's already, as a 16-year-old, he's had exit velocities up to 108 miles per hour in games. So really, really big power. He can hit the ball out to right center as a right-handed hitter. Like, there's huge power. He won the MVP in the amateur scouting league, really short-term league, like 10 games. He played in 7 of them. But in that, against good competition, he did only strike out 7 times. He only struck out once while walking 7 times. So that's a good showing against good competition, but whiff is part of the concern, and we'll have to see where that goes. If he has a decent enough hit tool with the power, it could be a really exciting offensive profile. Defensively, he has good hands. He's got a good arm, but the range is kind of limited. He's pretty well built, as you might expect with that type of power. Most people think he's going to be a third baseman. The other name that started getting attention at the end of the cycle was Moises Salazar. He's a catcher. He signed for $700,000. Switch hitter, barely eligible age-wise. He's one of the youngest players in the class to sign. But yeah, switch hitter. He's probably better from the right side right now, but the defense is really the appeal here behind the plate. As a 16-year-old, he's popping 1.9 second pop times in games to throw out runners. He's seen as a potentially plus receiver, blocker, thrower, everything. And scouts do like the bat too. So he really started kind of creeping up into the eyes of scouts, and he made some lists, more like off the beaten path lists, but some of the people who really follow the international scouting market, he's seen it as a pretty fun player to get. Moving to some more like middle tier bonuses here, and Henny Fernandez. Baseball America also likes him decent amount here. He won't be 17 until August. He's similar to Salazar, very young for the class. A lot of room to put on weight. He's only 145 pounds at the time of signing, but it's quick bat speed. It's got the swing that could be catered to potential power down the line if he can add strength in a productive way. He's very athletic. He's an above average runner. He's an infielder for now, but BA did mention outfield could be in the cards eventually. Not a bad infielder, just with the athleticism and everything else, outfield could be where he winds up. Osiris Ramirez, another guy who got some attention late. He is another power type of guy. He signed for $450,000. Better than average speed, so a little bit probably more athletic than Ricky Monies, but not quite the same level of power. Probably a little bit more of a concern in terms of the hit tool too. He can handle all the spots defensively in the infield, but also probably not shortstop in the end. I think we're probably looking at second or third as his final spot, but he's an interesting one. Santiago Garcia, another infielder from the same academy as Moises Salazar, actually. Really line drive approach right now into gap to gap, but he has power that he could get to in games with a little more loft in the swing. Plus runner on the bases. He's shown he can handle all the infield spots. Arm will be fine at any of them, but I would guess he ends up off of shortstop just with how many players are going to get looks at shortstop. Manny De Los Santos is the first true outfielder, although he played infield as an amateur a lot, on the list. $325,000 signing bonus for him. De Los Santos, switch hitter, very fast. Kurt Hogue actually put in his article that came out tonight, he was clocked at a 6.1 60-yard dash. That would have been second in the country for perfect game last year, and that was for 17-year-olds, and De Los Santos is a year younger. So probably bordering on 80 grade speed from him as a switch hitter. I like his swing a lot. He's a small guy. He's only 5'9", doesn't weigh a ton, but I like his swing. He had power. He showed power in the lower levels. He gives me a lot of Luis Lara vibes, who I'm a big fan of. So I like that one a lot. That's an under the radar guy that I'm really interested in. Leanders Matos. He signed for $300,000. He's another infielder, another guy who probably has a little bit more juice, a little bit more bat speed than you might guess if you saw him in his stature. He's one that feels kind of unlikely to stick at shortstop. Maybe second or third. Could be a guy who gets some outfield work as well. But a good athlete, makes good swing decisions. Actually, that's kind of like his main thing right now is the good swing decisions, but he showed some pretty decent pop at times as well. Ruben Rivost is a guy that the Brewers seem to like. $200,000 bonus. I really like his swing, left-handed swing. It's just a very fluid swing. He's got quick hands, gets to the ball fast. Again, not the biggest guy. This is a common theme amongst most of these guys. He even had some people refer to him as Pequeño Gigante, which means little giant. But some of the video I saw, like his energy is palpable. He is an electric type of player where he is just all energy all the time, quick hands, fast on the bases, a lot of excitement in his game. It seems like a guy who probably ends up in the outfield to me. He's played both infield and outfield. The Brewers listed him as an infielder. He just gives me the vibes on the base. The little video I've seen of him defensively looks like a guy who might end up in the outfield. Some other position players to know: Enrique Lovera signed out of Venezuela for $140,000. At one point, he was tied to Arizona, the Diamondbacks, for a really long time. It seems like a last-minute switch to the Brewers. Not exactly sure what happened there, but he's got a good frame. He showed some pop as well. Also known as like an energy guy, a leader, scrappy type of player. They referred to him as a gamer in the Baseball America write-up. Probably somebody who kind of outplays his skill level. We'll see if some of the skill catches up to some of the athleticism and the build. But if nothing else, he's going to give you really high effort and a lot of excitement in terms of games. Another catcher on the list, Sebastian Fernández. He signed out of Venezuela. No bonus number for him at this point. Really, really good athlete behind the plate. He even has played some outfield as well as an amateur. It's a noisy swing for me from the left side. A lot of moving parts, although I saw some newer video of him and I think he's toned it down a little bit from what I originally saw. But it's a toe tap almost into a leg kick. A lot of twisting and turning before he really gets going. But once he does get going, I like the general look of the swing. So I wonder if he can clean it up a little bit and if that'll be something that they can do for him in pro ball. Another catcher here, Francisco Murr. Here's where we get past these short players because Murr is one of the taller catchers I have seen. I don't know exactly what he's listed at yet. I don't know if it's official, but comparatively to everyone else that it was signing with, outside of one pitcher I'm going to talk about in a minute. He towered over everybody. He's a very tall catcher. Seems to move pretty decently. I've seen some receiving from him. He's said to have a pretty good arm. At the plate, doesn't really hit for the power you might expect, given his size. It's kind of a line drive approach, kind of a slow swing right now. But with his size and as he maybe grows into his body a little bit more, perhaps you see that get cleaned up a little bit. On the pitching side, to kind of wrap this up here, there are a few names that we know stuff about, and then others that the pitching's always the hardest to find anything on. Marcos Vera signed out of the DR. He got 130,000, and Baseball America wrote about him a little bit. He's been up to 93 miles per hour and has more projection left in the tank, a lot more room to put on some good weight. Mixes in a changeup and a curveball. Changeup being the best right now, a really good swing and miss pitch for him. Curveball has shown some decent signs, though. Can't find any video on him. I haven't really been able to see the delivery or anything, but a 6-figure bonus for a pitcher is always noteworthy, especially for the Brewers. So that's definitely a name I'll be keeping an eye on. The other 6-figure bonus we got for pitchers, that this is one I was able to find at one point. Actually, I remember when I found him, I was watching the World Series game that went, whatever it was, 17, 18 innings. But left-handed pitcher, I was very excited when I found him. Alexander Mercedes out of the DR. He signed for $100,000. He's already up to 95 miles per hour. He's just barely 17 right now. Sits in the 92 to 94 range. He has the look of a guy who's at some point going to be pumping upper 90s from the left side. I've seen some video of his curveball. I think it's a pretty good pitch. It looks pretty sharp. It looks like it could play pretty well with a fastball that has some velo up at the top of the zone. I don't know anything about his other secondaries. If he has any right now, it might be mostly a 2-pitch mix. But the report I've seen is that he threw a lot of strikes in amateur baseball as well. So a guy with those tools from the left side, throwing a lot of strikes, definitely somebody I'm going to be interested in. Another really lanky body type with some projection left. Yohan Gonzalez out of the DR. No idea what his bonus is either. Kurt Hogue kind of wrote him up in the Journal Sentinel a little bit. A lot of projection left. Could be some velo down the line. Just on the video that I have seen of him, I think it's a changeup. Well, I know it's a changeup. I think it's a pretty good changeup. It's hard to tell, but it looks like a pretty good changeup. He definitely looks like he's a natural pronator. I wonder about his ability to throw a breaking ball based on the video I've seen. I haven't seen any breaking balls, and he looks comfortable throwing the changeup. But yeah, lanky guy with a pretty good changeup is a good place to start for a teenager. Daniel Munoz, no video of him. He's signed for $25,000, so a low bonus. Kurt Hogue wrote, he's a right-hander with a powerful arm. So that's all we know about Munoz right now. Jean Rivero out of Venezuela, also no idea what his bonus was. And Kurt wrote, he's a right-hander with loose, strong mechanics on the mound. Haven't been able to find any video, and that's all I've got on him right now. So the other 4 that signed are right-handed pitcher Diego Trio out of Venezuela, right-handed pitcher Miguel Andrade out of Venezuela, right-handed pitcher Jordi Brache out of the DR. That's one of the 2 players that I technically couldn't find. And the other one is infielder Josue Rodriguez. So you have Jose Rodriguez and Josue Rodriguez out of the DR. So like I said, 22 players, smallest class in quite a while. I would imagine that's tied to the fact that they have a very full lower level of the minors next year. It's going to be very interesting to see who's in Arizona versus Carolina versus Appleton. They're going to have a lot of decisions to make in that regard, and who they want to push and who they want to be smart with or careful with. And that also means it could get hard to push some of the Dominican players stateside from last year. So I think there's going to be a lot of repeaters in the DSL and a lot of guys that they're not prepared to cut. So that made it a little bit tougher maybe to have as big a class as they normally have had. They will continue to sign players as the season progresses. They always do. I'd be very surprised if they're completely out of bonus money. I mean, they had 7.3 million. Yeah, 7.3 million in bonus money. Based on what we know, my guess would be is they're around 6 million in bonuses given out. Maybe a little bit higher, but they'll sign honestly mostly pitchers throughout the year. They discover pitchers as they go. They have certain guys that they just sign a little bit later. There are certain guys who don't become eligible to sign until a little bit later. So sometimes the class gets bigger just strictly based off of when they turn the age that they're allowed to sign at. So that could be part of it too. But generally a smaller class, but one that's pretty interesting. It has a bunch of guys who, some people in the scouting community, I know the Brewers are pretty high on some of these guys. It's a fun class. It'll be one that'll be interesting to follow. And the honest truth is that every year you don't know who the guy's going to be. Everyone thought it was going to be Jorge Quintana, and then it ends up being Luis Pena and Jesus Mate. Churio was the biggest bonus, but at the end of his first DSL season, I don't think anybody saw what was coming. So these are players that you're going to have to be patient with. It's going to be a while before you really know anything about them. Sometimes they explode on the scene their second season, like Mate and Churio did. But sometimes it's going to take a couple extra years. Lara's been taking a little bit longer. It's just the way it goes. So it's a fun day. It's a fun day that I do a lot of prep for. And then it's one of those days that it's on the baseball calendar. People talk about it, get excited about it for a day or two, and then it's gone. But I enjoy it. And hopefully I gave you as much information as I could on the guys who signed, because yeah, it's tough to dig this stuff up, but it's also like a treasure hunt for me. So I'm just constantly on social media trying to find these guys. But that's all I got for the sandbox this week. It was probably pretty long, but I needed to get that out because I was excited to talk about these guys.
That was good. I think that's about the most that we've done within one of these episodes. I know you've been doing the minor league specials.
Yes.
Are you guys doing more of those, or is the third one the last one?
Nope. We still have the Shuckers and the Sounds to cover. So we've got 2 more.
Wow. Still going to be busy then.
Oh, yeah.
Well, everybody's going to have that to look forward to. You'll hear from us again on the regular show in a couple weeks. Thank you all for listening.